first. And again, say welcome everyone to our weekly call. If I share my screen momentarily. Just a reminder, this week we're going to talk, not really DNS related, but our main focus is going to be on QR code based attacks, essentially picking up on a discussion point that came up 2 or 3 weeks ago. And Warren kindly volunteered to give sort of share his thoughts on that topic, which because I think it was on the back of an article suggesting that sort of QR code based phishing was on the increase, something along those lines when it came up. So we'll do that, then I'll run through some of the recent sort of news updates, etc., as per normal. So let me stop sharing. And at this point, say, Warren, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me share my screen here. Make sure I get the right one. We want screen number 2. Screen number 2, please. It's not giving me the option. Let's just go with that, shall we? Okay. Are you seeing QR code scanning?
Yeah, we can see your title screen. Now full screen.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I have successfully overcome the first hurdle. So before I get stuck in, a very quick introduction. As you can see, my name is Warren Sealey. I hold the position of the Technical Director of Messaging for Broadcom. If you're wondering what that is, that means man who joined Message Labs in 2001 is still here. So I had the pleasure of joining the email security company previously known as Message Labs in its earliest days when it was a spin-off from Star Internet here in the United Kingdom. And in that time, I've had the pleasure of working in sales engineering, working in technical support, working with the audit and compliance team. And now I am what's referred to as the sharp tip of the spear when it comes to customer-facing technology. However, what we're going to be talking about today is not really much associated with that. I'm here as a representative for the ladies and gentlemen in the engineering team. The idea of this presentation was the statement that QR code is becoming more prevalent. And the TLDR is, yes, absolutely it is. We started to see it picking up probably January, February of this year. And since then, it's just risen more and more and more. Now, before I get stuck into it, though, one thing I will say is over the course of working with email security, I have seen a lot of spam attack techniques come and go, sometimes very, very quickly. We've seen OCR, text on a background. We've seen putting characters into tables on the screen. We've seen chunks of text from Harry Potter books in white on white background to beat Bayesian analysis. And what I will say overall is some bad guy has a bright idea. He launches it into the market. The good guys have to struggle to catch up for a short period of time. But then inevitably what happens is the unusualness, the strangeness, the fact that these messages are out of the ordinary and they don't look like normal business emails make them eventually quite easy to catch. So I'm going to talk about some of the threats here today, but reality, long run, we're not particularly worried about them because the kind of emails you generate when you're doing QR codes is not like normal business emails. If I was really worried about a trend that I see in the email security world at the moment, I would say it's more likely to be business email compromise, BEC scams. where the bad guys take over an account of somebody you already know, hijack a conversation you are already having with that person, and use that to do some social engineering to get you to give up some private information, make a financial transfer, or change some details somewhere in a database. Anyway, having said all of that, quick look at a couple of the scams, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go on to some of the technology that's not just us, but other companies are putting in place to stop these things. So the first thing it's being used is for phish attacks. And this isn't just, by the way, QR code. This is QR code plus OCR. QR code, of course, is when we put an image on the screen, and it's designed, we point our mobile phone at the image, and the image contains a URL, and on our mobile phone then takes us to whatever URL that we are seeing. But also at the same time, and from the same people, what we're kind of seeing is a lot of image-based spam. So there's no words and phrases in the body of the email. There's just a picture. And that picture contains the graphics, the logos, and the words and the phrases. And when you click on it, it contains a URL. So as far as the computers are concerned, really all you get is, well, this email just contains a image, and it just links to a URL. So phish attacks, small email bodies, just a URL in it, and then a picture. That picture will be, the common ones are the Microsoft technical support scam, which is, this is Microsoft technical support. We've recognized there's a problem with your computer. You need to call this telephone number. So the call to the action is just a telephone number. Or you need to do something, click on this button to continue. And it doesn't matter. The button is just part of the image. It doesn't matter if you click on the button or any other part of the image. It takes you to the URL. The URLs tend to use redirectors. So you're all familiar with URL shorteners. And you also get URL redirectors where it points to a legitimate document hosting site on something like Google. And that immediately uses a JavaScript to pass you onwards. What we are seeing is within the image, keep my same password, keep current password, keep same password. A lot of these are password reset scams. So what we've decided to do is we use OCR to look at the image and try and extract the words and phrases. If it's a URL, we then have other technologies. I'll talk a little bit about those later on, which look at the URL. They say what category it is. Can we follow it to its destination? Are there JavaScript redirectors? There's an interesting technology called minhash. I don't know if well, everybody here, I'm sure, remembers Alta Vista, one of the very early search engines. They had a great technology for deduping search results called minhash, where what they did is they looked at a website, and then if another website came in, they were able to do a fuzzy fingerprint of it and say, well, this website is statistically identical to this new website. This is great in my world because a lot of the phishing sites we see are what we call cookie cutter attacks, where the bad guy has a template for an attack website and he just changes the logo and changes some of the text. But in reality, the websites are statistically identical to each other. So when we look at a URL and we follow it to its destination, we're able to say, does this website look similar to websites that we've seen before? So this is one of the forms of attack that we're seeing, phish attacks using images. Another one, this is some more examples for the image attacks, technical support scams and image attacks. We have a Microsoft one, 7 messages in your secure folder. Doesn't matter whether you press the review message button or anything around it, same thing happens. As I come from the company that bought Symantec and was previously closely associated with this organization, the Norton LifeLock one is very close to my own heart. Norton LifeLock, great technology, but as with any good technology, somebody is going to impersonate it and try and attack the people who are using it. And then a PayPal one. Great. This one is just a call to action of a telephone number, an example of taking the email-based attack and transferring it to a different communication mechanism. Now, I don't know what's at the end of this. Quite commonly, they're a hold message, but it's a massive premium rate number. And so even if you're only on there for 30 seconds before you realize that there's something not going on, you might have spent £10, $15 on the premium rate before you realize what's going on. So that's just a couple of examples of those kind of attacks. The next one, more pertinent to what we're discussing today, is the QR code spam. So this is where you get an email. The email contains a QR code, and there is a call to action of, we need you to click on this. And a lot of the time it's around ticketing, or it's around access controls, things that QR codes are more and more commonly being used for. And as an aside, who really thought that QR code technology would become so popular? To me, it seems that it is an artifact of COVID, because we became so used to clicking on QR codes, checking into buildings. Menus disappeared and QR codes appeared on tables instead. And of course, if you start looking at tickets for events, paper tickets have gone away and QR codes have picked up instead. So it's a technology probably when it came out that everyone thought was a bit of a gimmick, but for replacing paper, something that I can have but is still scannable, it's become very, very popular. What's happening is, here, we're not using your computer to perpetuate the fraud. What's happening is that the image that appears on your screen, as I say, is getting scanned with your mobile phone. Your mobile phone is then visiting the URL. So the email itself doesn't contain anything except the QR code. It's not clickable. There's no text in there. There's no URL sitting behind it. It's only when you take that picture does your phone interpret the information which is in the QR code and direct your web browser to the destination. So what we then need to do is analyze that QR code and say, what's the URL? And then we need to review the URL and say, is this good or is this bad? So a little bit of a background on the growth of this. As you can see, my stats only go up to August, frustratingly. I haven't been able to get any more since then, which is the time that we were doing this presentation to our own customers. Now, the May, June, July growth, yes, that is a growth, but at the same time, it's a little bit artificially inflated, because when we brought out technologies to try and identify QR code and OCR-based threats, we were worried about the resources that it would absorb. If you can imagine just looking at an image on every single email, and we scan 1 billion plus emails a month, looking on an image on every single email, analyzing that image, trying to extract text from the image, trying to extract an QR code from the image, is processor intensive. So what we did on day one, when we realized that this was a problem, is we set the threshold very high for the size of the image. You can see here, 28th of March, we were only scanning images which were bigger than 256 kilobytes in size. And honestly, that eliminated almost everything. It's very rare that these images would be that big. And then what we did is, over time, is we reduced the size threshold for, and we were able to monitor it and make sure that we weren't introducing additional latency, making sure that we weren't creating bottlenecks in our processing. So down to July, where we were down to 40 kilobytes in size, I believe we've dropped down to about 30 now. And then in August, we also incorporated some controls around the width and the height, because we found that we were able to focus on things better. And then MD5 signature caching. If you see an image, you analyze it, you realize that it is bad. What you do is you create an MD5 checksum for that. So if the same image turns up again, you don't need to spend all of those resources analyzing it. You can just go, oh, that checksum's now in a bad list, and we can convict the email straight away. And then more frequently, more recently, and this actually, I've got an extra slide on this, background color obfuscation is the next thing that we tried. So with all of these kind of attacks, I was saying at the beginning, these bad guys come up with these new ideas. They evolve very, very quickly. And the latest evolution that we've seen, which is quite fun, is dazzle camouflage. Now, some of you of a certain age are immediately picturing a World War II English warship painted in jagged zebra stripes. And this was actually done. So when a submarine commander has got it in the periscope and he's trying to plot a, how can I hit it with a torpedo? It was very difficult to work out which direction it was going in and how fast it was going. But the other thing that you could do with dazzle camouflage is you can make every single image different. We saw this back in 2003, 2004, when image spam came around for the first time. The bad guys would change 1 pixel. You change 1 pixel, you change the whole file hash. And they would try and put discordant color backgrounds on. And they're doing it again. They're trying to make it more difficult to do OCR and to pick up on the text that's in the image. So this is the actual QR code count. And you can see here from July and August, it's steady, it's increasing slightly. And I can tell you that since this was done, it's been increasing more and more. So how does this all work? Well, I was kind of intrigued by the whole, what is a QR code and what does it work and how is it used? And as you know, you could use them in payment. We all use them for logins, ticketing, ordering things. Wi-Fi sharing is quite common, one-time passwords, and so on and so on. And there's an ISO. There is an international standard for how they are, so they're always compatible. But it is quite wide. You've probably seen you can have round QR codes. You can have QR codes with pictures in them. As long as they have certain requirements, certain characteristics, then you can use them in many, many different ways. Just think for a moment, by the way, about all of this spamming and scamming that is going on here. Think if you could print out some QR codes with a URL. Let's just kind of humorously say that I was going to put it to a YouTube video of Rick Astley singing Never Gonna Give You Up. But I print them in sticker form in various different sizes. What's to stop me now going around in public and putting these QR codes over commonly used QR codes for menus on tables and for Wi-Fi sharing and all of these different things? Of course, I'm doing it harmlessly for rickrolling, but it doesn't take a lot to make those the phishing attack. So with a couple of 100 QR code stickers in a high footfall place like a train station, you could probably get quite a good hit rate. You only need 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 people to click on it and to have a, this is, I need your email address and login. So it's Wi-Fi sharing. Free Wi-Fi. Click, get my free Wi-Fi. I have a forged signing page that says, yeah, you need to do this. And I put in some private information and it gets stolen. So very, very easy to use, not just in email, but also in the real world. So what are we doing? So email comes into my email security solution. We extract the image attachments, and then we put it into a system which firstly does OCR and takes the text out of the image, and also at the same time recognizes and extracts any QR codes that are contained within the image. Text strings go through our spam scanning. We look for URLs, we look for words and phrases, and we can take action to convict the email. And if it's a QR code, we extract the URL from the QR code and we follow it to its destination, and we try and work out whether or not the destination website is malicious or not. Bit of background information. I share this deck with anybody who wants, but the idea first is it might not even just be in the body of the mail. It might actually be in a document. So you've got to go through a file passing layer first to extract images from document files, and then depending on the type of image, you've got to go through your image passing layer second before you can go into your phishing and your QR code scanner looking for the phishing links. And this kind of hopefully gives you an idea of why this is so resource intensive. There are multiple layers of parsing that you've got to get through in order to get to your intended destination. And you can understand why this is something that we probably don't want to do unless we have to. And that's why once you've found something, creating a checksum for a file hash for it is so important. Implementation, I apologize. I've just grabbed this. This was from an internal technical deck, very much as we were seeing on the previous slide. So I want to finish up with a couple of examples. Here is a QR code. Don't point your phones at the screen. This is actually a real threat. I think the website is now dead, so we're actually quite lucky. But this is one that we saw in email quite over the course of the summer, and it takes you to a site, and that site asks you to log into something with a username and password which is of value. And then we're seeing some developments. This slide is actually brand new in the last couple of weeks. They're trying to make them harder to scan. They're adding larger border areas. They are blanking out pieces. They're using obfuscation. They're using the dazzle camouflage. We have to invert, negate the image. But the good news about this is this shows this rapid evolution. And this email becomes less and less normal because the bad guys are trying to obfuscate their attack more and more. And there will come a tipping point where good old-fashioned heuristics, which we've been working with for 20 plus years, we can create a set of rules that say, if it's got this characteristic and this characteristic and this characteristic, just convict it. No need to even look at the QR code. The bad guy has added so much abnormal obfuscation into the attack that we're just going to be able to grab it. And typically 18 months, 2 years after one of these attacks comes out, it becomes useless because of the amount of obfuscation that's needed to get it through. So that's it. Any questions?
There's a few comments in the chat just while people are thinking. Warren, just scrolling back to the top. You may have covered these, so apologies in advance. But let's just see. How about adding in real physical images like posters and LED screens in public in addition to email? Isn't that the more you... Yeah, okay, you covered that. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I mentioned it, but yeah, posters, LED screens, anything that can display a QR code could be used in an attack. I think sometimes we get a little bit tied up with the concept of high tech, whereas I'm quite taken with the idea of rickrolling the world with a slab of QR code and a sticky printer label.
Yeah. Just scrolling down on your sort of graphs where you had the sort of spikes in volume.
Yes.
Why the lower monthly stats always going down to 0? Are they
Let's
just
have a quick look here.
Weekday fish effects? Not this one.
Yeah, a lot of these. Yeah, a lot of these are day by day. So it's the weekly. It's exactly that. It's the weekly effect.
Yeah.
It would appear that bad guys also take days off.
Which is good to know.
Yeah. Right.
And final comment on the end. You can ignore my slightly obscure reference to the well-known OMD album. Battleships. Kurt's comment at the bottom there, with CSS, a full screen, wide, transparent click me button without any optical attributes would also work.
It would indeed. Where we are there, CSS and all of them, our email engines, our email clients are becoming more and more feature rich. They're in most cases, they are a browser. And even if they're thick clients, they have all that browser technology. We look at the code which is contained within the email. So actual code within the email body, HTML and HTML attachments. If any of you are familiar with the TA577 gang, they use Quackbot and Emotet, and they're currently using a lot of Pikabot. And they cycle through different mechanisms for trying to get their emails in front of people. Over the summer, we saw quite a lot of emails with a HTML or HTML attachment, and the code was actually included within them. Has there been a study on the prevalence of the DNS host names seen in malicious QR codes? What are the most popular domains for redirection? That is an excellent question. I'm going to take that one as a note, and I will respond to this group, because it's core to this group, in writing. We have all kinds of information on DNS host names, which are used for hosting bad stuff, for redirectors, legitimate ones they use for redirectors, shorteners, and we can kind of I can give you some stats on that at a future meeting, or send it round on an email in case you find it interesting. So, John, I'll dig into that for you.
Yeah, because I guess at the end of the day, this all basically gets back to a domain name or a URL in the end. So, yeah, that's a good point.
Yes.
I suppose the scary thing is, at the moment with QR codes, it's a bit like USB memory sticks not so many years ago, where people just routinely insert them on the assumption it was fine. It's kind of the same with people scanning QR codes, isn't it, really? There's not that hesitation currently.
People don't think that process through. I've got something, I've scanned it. For some reason, I trust where it's taking me. Yeah.
I suppose that well-known example of the QR code, I can't remember who it was for now off the top of my head, at the Super Bowl, that would have been a fabulous opportunity for spam the entire US population in 30 seconds.
So, Killian, as well, you mentioned there attacks within the QR code for the reader library software. I apologize if I gave that. That's not one that I run across very, very much. So if you're thinking about using a QR code, this sounds to me a little bit, and I'm having to think on the fly here, in the kind of stenography, hiding information or using it as an attack. What we tend to find with those is you need it's a bit like a bootstrap attack. You need a pre-exploited reader. A QR code by itself can contain information. And typically, though, the reader won't do anything fancy with that information. The reader is my iPhone. If it's a URL, if it's text, it will try and take me to a URL. If we could, and my colleagues who work in data protection are very keen on looking at this. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's not an insignificant amount of information that you can actually put into a QR code. So they're worried about QR codes being used to exfiltrate data. So I take some PII or some secrets, I turn it into a QR code, and I send it so it can be read at the other end, very much like hiding it within an image. But in order to extract that, your reader needs to know what it's looking for and know what to expect. So when it comes to those kind of attacks, they are very uncommon, because to get a compromised reader onto a victim's machine is basically more complicated than getting to the QR code to them. So probably not something that we're going to see a lot of for malware attacks, maybe more so for data exfiltration or for confidentiality, trying to move secrets outside an organization. Fake browser update scams. Yep, that will do. Click on it. It takes you to a web page that says your browser needs to update. Click here. Yep. Are most of the links fully qualified URLs with suffixes or just short? Bit of both. the vast majority that we see, the best ones, use something like Bitly. And the reason they use something like Bitly is because the bad guys are rotating really quickly. It's great. If you get a URL, we can put it in a database. But what they actually do is they have a script that says, right, here's my URL, encode it using Bitly. And once you've sent that 3 times, encode it again using Bitly in a slightly different way. So the shortened URLs change every single time, but they are routing through to the same intended destination. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, you will tend to see mostly just kind of a short name. QR code straight to IP address. Ooh, bypassing DNS. QR to IP prevalence. I'm going to say it's probably pretty uncommon. And the reason I would say it's pretty uncommon is once you've got the IP, IPs are valuable things. You want to disguise them, because once we've got an IP address, when we follow a URL to its destination, we of course do the DNS lookup. If it's got the IP, that's incredibly easy for us to drop in a, put that in a blacklist, and the bad guys would burn through their IP addresses very, very quickly. Encoded IPs which aren't even IP addresses. There was a spate of these over the summer. And in actual fact, it wasn't to do with, it wasn't actually to do with QR codes, but these were being used in spam and phishing emails. And what they were doing, we all kind of look at IP addresses and dotted quads, but there are other ways of encoding information to represent an IP address. Can't remember off the top of my head, but you can encode IPs. And we saw some attacks over the summer where the bad guys were using base 64, that was it, base 64 encoded IP addresses in the body of the email. And for a short period of time, we and other vendors had a problem with that because we didn't actually recognize it as an IP address. We didn't recognize it as something that we needed to pass. However, very quickly we went, oh, hang on a minute. What we need is we need to be able to recognize that that is the valid format of an IP address, and we need a parser to take it out of base 64 encoded and put it back into a standard dotted quad. Right. A QR code that can't have a sticker. QR code displayed in the night sky by drones. Yeah. I'll tell you what, if get me enough drones, I think I might be able to do something with that. Anyway, great. I've got some notes here. Andrew, can I rely on you to get me the chat, because I will have a further read of all of those, and if there's anything else I can supply that might be of interest, I will do so.
Perfect. Yeah, I can certainly do that. I'll send that to you afterwards, Warren, so you've got that by way of backup in case there's anything else in there you can sift out. Well, I think it would be interesting, as expected. I think a rich vein of thought. So yeah, thank you, Warren, for sort of diverting onto that for sort of 30 or so minutes. That's really helpful.
You're always welcome.
Brilliant. Right, well, let's move seamlessly on from that to some news updates, and then let's bring John into the discussion, who will, I think, have something to say fairly imminently. Right, so in fact, immediately, so news items, as you may have seen from the weekly headlines earlier today. And I see I misspelt Dresden, which is a bad start. So from Quad9's website, plus a few others, I put a few links in the same article. Quad9 turns the Sony case around. This is, as a reminder, the case brought in the German regional courts originally by Sony Music against Quad9, requiring it to block access to certain copyright infringing sites, and initially supported by one of the German regional courts. My knowledge of German regional courts not being extensive, but obviously things have moved on. So before we go on to the other items, let's pause there. I'll stop sharing and sort of live by satellite almost from Oregon, John.
Yep, thanks.
Add some texture to that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, actually very good news last week. To answer kind of your previous comments, the two other courts actually in Germany, first the Hamburg and then the Leipzig courts, ruled basically not in our favor in that. So we've gone through two escalation processes in the German court system, and the third, in the Dresden courts, ruled in our favor, and it was I would not say it's an absolute win, but as far as this case is concerned, it was a absolute win, we hope, meaning that the court found in favor of Quad9. And said that the case that Sony had brought against us was not sufficiently justified. You can actually read the whole details. We've got the posting of the PDF in German and English translation on our website. So if you really want to dig into it, you can do that. There's also some opinions by our legal counsel, Rickert Law, about some of the points as well. But basically that Sony wished us to block, or demanded that we block certain domain names, Canada.to and a few others, which pointed to a server, I believe, in Ukraine, where the physical server is located, but of course TO is a Tongan TLD. And then that server contained links to another server, which had copyright infringing content on it. So it's a very indirect and diffuse way of going after things. But they decided to go after Quad9 because we resolved those domain names in Germany. But the court ruled that that the process by which Sony pursued that was insufficient, meaning that they did not try the other avenues open to them to try to take this copyright infringing content down, and that DNS recursive resolvers should be the last thing that are approached. And the court basically said, no, that wasn't the last thing that was approached. It was actually somewhere in the middle, or at least that's our interpretation of it. And that's, Sony was incorrect in pursuing this kind of blocking with Quad9, or trying to enforce this kind of blocking with Quad9. So they have essentially dismissed the case, and in additional good news, they've said that Sony cannot appeal, meaning that the court in Dresden says that their word is final. Now, there's no such thing as final in legal terms, so they can actually appeal the appeal, and then once they've achieved that, then they might be able to go on to the next court. So we're not entirely certain that we've heard the last of this yet, but the chances of them succeeding there are, from what I understand, are relatively low. But we're not, and the English term is we're not counting our chickens before they're hatched, right? We're not believing that this is over yet, but we have a pretty good confidence that this is the end of this particular case. So we have unblocked those domains, and we've unblocked them worldwide. Another angle to this case, which we really were unhappy about, was that the courts in one of the previous appeals found that even though we were blocking those domains on our German-based servers for citizen or for IP addresses which we believe were in Germany, that was insufficient because Sony tested using a VPN. And, my goodness, if we test using a VPN, we discovered that other resolvers outside of Germany are resolving this domain name. So basically, the geographic limitation of this, the previous courts in Germany had not paid enough attention to, or that they didn't believe our side of that conversation. And so therefore we had to block globally, because if anybody in Germany via any method was able to resolve these domains, we were found to be liable. And in fact, the word liable has more meanings in German. Steuerhaftung, I think, is the German word, and I'm sorry to those of you who speak German that I'm butchering this, but there are additional liabilities that we had, and in fact we were fined because of that issue, where they were able to get around our German local blocking by going to a VPN. We were found liable and fined 10,000 euros for that, which is, in our view, somewhat unexpected, would be the light way of saying it. because that essentially extends German jurisdiction to everywhere in the world, and that doesn't seem to be consistent. And the court in Dresden did seem to agree with that, and that they reversed that decision. So we're very happy with the final outcome. So this kind of rides on the coattails of another case, which I won't speak to because it's not ours, but Cloudflare won part of their case in Cologne, some of which was similar to what Quad9 was fighting. And so there's an entire other case on this. However, Cloudflare's case involves proxying data as well as the DNS, so it's slightly different. But there were successful outcomes in the DNS side of that, I believe, in both of those cases, which is good news. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we announced really on the same day that we've received also a notice from copyright holders in Italy that they want us to block a variety of different domains in Italy. So until we have complete closure on the case in Germany, we are complying with that, so we don't have to go to court in Italy at the same time as we're still closing out the case in Germany. It is our expectation that once we've closed out our German case, we will open the case in Italy as well, and so start that process. As much as we would not like to be in the business of defending the DNS from legal assault, that seems to be kind of what we're doing for a while. And all of this is possible, even though Quad9 is a Swiss entity, due to a convention called the Lugano Convention, to which Switzerland is a signatory, which allows civil cases to proceed cross-border inside other members of the Lugano Convention, which includes most of, in fact, if not all of the EU, as well as some other nations like Switzerland. So this is an interesting process. There is some downside to winning our case in Dresden. It's not as far as we're concerned, it's not a downside to winning the case, right? We just like to be done with it. However, it means that the case has not proceeded to the final courts outside of Germany in the EU, where this could be heard, and the DSA, the new declarations in the DSA could be applied, and a more clear ruling could be given. We expect somehow that's going to have to happen at some point, because otherwise we're going to be hearing from each one of the EU nations in turn with different attacks based on those different regional laws, and we'd like to get something that's clarifying this at an EU level. But we are very enthusiastic right now about the ruling in Germany, because we think that's going to inform a number of other nations or a number of other policy folks who are looking at this, trying to determine how DNS law applies, and specifically how copyright applies, but this does have applications to other things. So I can't predict how the case in Italy is going to go, but I'm hopeful that ultimately will be successful in that as well. And I'm just glad to be done with the case in Germany, so we can get on with the business of running a resolver, and at some point, not looking forward to picking up the case in Italy, but that does look like it's going to be something we have to do.
Well, congratulations, at least partially, John. I guess at least it means that if anyone else brings a case, certainly in Germany, they'll have to show it was a last resort rather than
right
path of least resistance, almost.
Yeah, the bar is quite high now, I think, for bringing blocking as a legal effort to recursive resolver operators. It's not impossible, certainly, but the bar is significantly higher. So and that's really what we want. We'd really like to just get, well, anyway, we'd like to get clarity from not just a German perspective, but we'd like to get more of a concerted effort to have this kind of clarity given on a multinational stakeholder, specifically in the EU method. But that's going to be some time in the future, I suspect, and that's far outside the scope of what we can help with.
Yeah, fair enough. And I can see in the chat, the Arno is claiming responsibility for the Lugano Convention. So I think that's roughly what his comment is saying.
For better or worse.
Fantastic. All right, well, thank you for that, John. So you heard it sort of from the horse's mouth, as it were, in terms of what the current state of play is. And for those of you, if I just then go back to my sort of screen sharing in a moment, you can then read the sort of background, as John said. There's sort of quite copious details on, as you would expect, on the Quad9 site, and various other commentaries around the space, including the Cloudflare case, and various third parties commenting as well. So there's plenty of background on this, but to hear it sort of firsthand, I think is saves a lot of reading and gives the salient points.
Well, there's a lot of more detail. I try to condense this down as best I could, but there's a whole lot of discussion in that case ruling. I mean, we attacked this from a variety of different directions, ranging from, do you have authority to claim copyright, to, court process, to just the core issue, which is, is the DNS the appropriate place to go after for this? And I think we got positive rulings on pretty much all of those. There were some areas where the court didn't really address some of our arguments in huge detail, but I'm very pleased with the outcome as it stands.
Yeah, fantastic. So a few less things to have sleepless nights about, hopefully. Well, I'm sure you've still got plenty of those on your list, other than that, but I suppose that's the life of running a resolver. Fantastic. Thank you for coming on at short notice to do that, John. That's much.
Thanks for inviting me. Maybe I'll start to make these meetings more frequently now that I don't have so many other meetings stomping on it with lawyers.
Yeah. Cheaper to attend these as well. Fantastic. Right. Well, let me then go back to continue the screen sharing. So that neat covers the sort of first two, but as I say, there's plenty more detail there should you be interested. Kathleen, as her article on ECH has been picked up most recently by Ripe. So if you didn't pick it up previously on APNIC, you can see it on Ripe. Definitely worth a read. The other fun one I'll mention on this screen, sort of indirectly DNS related, innovative use of domain name registration data to monitor economic activity, in this case in Australia, which I thought was just really interesting application of the DNS. So it really just goes to show that the answer is the DNS for many things, including questions of economics. And then sort of a few malware related things. In the interest of time, I won't run through those, but you've got those in the weekly headlines from earlier today. Those of you that get the emails, should you be so interested in catching up on those. And then sort of bottom one, Jeff Huston has published another useful summary from the recent ITF 118 meeting, this time on the MapRG sort of group. The Measurement and Analysis of Protocols Research Group, to give it its full name, which is quite helpful because that clashed with the TLS working group, so I wasn't able to go to it. So it's quite handy to have Jeff's summary of the discussion to hand instead. So appreciate that from him. A whole bunch of other stuff caught my eye this week, of which that you should see those on the list. Quite a mixed bag of things. Wearing my sort of IWF trustee hat, including that Meta's announcement on Friday of the use of end-to-end encryption on its messaging, which does have significant implications for the identification and blocking of the transmission of CSAM, but that's probably a discussion for another place if anyone is interested in having that. But so there's a bunch of other things there on different topics for you to read at your leisure. Quick reminder on some looming deadlines for things. So if you want to present at Morg, the Morg 60 call for presentations deadline is in a couple of days, Wednesday this week, and this time next week, Nanog 90's call for presentations deadline is reached. So you've got till midweek for Morg and till next Monday for Nanog 90 if you're putting forward anything. And then there's a couple of deadlines coming up at the end of the month, but I'll remind you of those next week. Then they're more policy related. Finally, on forthcoming events, I haven't got any more that I'm aware of through to the end of this calendar year. The sort of next one that I'm aware of coming up is OARC 42 in Charlotte in the beginning of February. Of course, you've got the CES event at the start of January, but I think that'd be a stretch to imagine there's much DNS related stuff at that. And the reason I've highlighted the ITF 119 one is because the registrations opened up, I think, middle of last week, if I remember rightly. So you can now register to attend in Brisbane. If you're planning to attend, I'd suggest looking at flights sooner rather than later, as they will get quite expensive if you leave them too close to the deadline, if you're traveling probably from the Americas or Europe, certainly. And then finally, in terms of topics coming up, I've at Carolina's request to change the planned date of the Internet Standards Tracker presentation. This is Carolina from the DNS Research Federation. They demoed a version of that based on, I think it was on ICANN, a few weeks ago, and they were going to sort of present that on this call as well. But actually, they should have an IETF version available by early February. So we'll have that presentation actually with a sort of looking at IETF standards rather than other standards bodies standards. But it'd be sort of pushed back by a few weeks to do that. Also, the DNSSEC non-deployment, what can be done presentation, sort of reprising a really interesting presentation from RIPE with a bit more time for discussion. I've pushed that back a week because its author is unavailable for the first week of January. So we'll do that slightly later than planned. So I'll let you know if we get anything specific lined up for the 8th of January. A reminder, we won't have calls, funnily enough, on the 25th of January, of December, or the 1st of January. Which probably won't come as a surprise, I hope. So our last call of the year will be this time next week, when Peter Lowe may or may not be kicking off the karaoke. I suspect not, but you never know. And then, as I say, we'll resume on the 8th of January, topic to be determined. So that's it from me. So I will stop there and just in the last couple of minutes or so see if anyone's got any other business that you want to raise. And I think, well, actually, I sit looking in the chat while people are thinking. Yeah, I think the ITF, so the DNS Research Federation Standards Tracker may help, Vicky, to give us a sense of what the standards are up to. But let's wait and see when we see the presentation in a few weeks' time. See how advanced that is at that point. So anything from anyone else? And if you have, pop it in the chat if that's easiest, or just unmute and speak out loud if you're in an environment where you can easily do that. Maybe a sort of few more seconds to do either if you do. Doesn't look like anyone's typing. Okay, well, I'm assuming not, and it is just about on the hour. So thank you, everyone, for your time this week. Particularly thank you to Warren for your presentation and John for your spontaneous update on court cases across Europe, which, well, as you said, no doubt more to come on that topic in the new year. But good to have some positive news on all of that. So with that, have a fantastic week, everyone, and look forward to catching up same time next week. So see you all then. Thanks all.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye.